Imagine holding an object that is just so profoundly empty that the very concept of nothing just sort of breaks down in your hands.
Right, it just falls apart completely.
Yeah, or like trying to stare into a corner of a room that's so devoid of existence that your own act of looking is the only thing keeping that corner real.
Which is an incredibly tall order for any piece of literature to attempt.
Totally. But today we are attempting to prove fundamentally and structurally that absolute nothingness is a logical impossibility.
Right.
And because it's impossible, it means that listening to this deep dive right now, driving your car or sitting at your desk, you are quite literally the universe taking a highly focused, localized look at itself.
I mean, it approaches reality not just as a philosophical puzzle, but as a rigid structural necessity.
Yeah. We are diving into a truly staggering manuscript today. It's titled You Are Me, the Book of Existence. And I want to set the table for you because this isn't light reading.
No, definitely not.
Our mission for this deep dive is to explore how this single text attempts to fundamentally rewire how you perceive every single object, every single person, and every passing second around you.
And the prologue makes this really astonishing claim right out of the gate.
Right, it explicitly states what it is not.
Exactly. The author says, what you are about to read is not a book of science. It is not a book of religion. It's not philosophy. And it's not purely spirituality either.
Which is a very deliberate boundary to draw.
Yeah, because when you isolate those disciplines, they often hit structural dead ends. Science, in its strict empirical pursuit, often strips away the subjective meaning of the observer.
Right, it just becomes pure data.
And religion can sometimes rely so heavily on faith that it abandons structural mechanics and logical proofs. Philosophy gets so abstracted in language that it loses touch with the physical world.
And then pure spirituality can just drift into this sort of solipsistic inner journey that ignores the shared objective reality we all live in. It's like trying to understand a house by only looking at the plumbing.
That's a great way to put it.
Like ignoring the wiring and the architecture and, the actual people living inside it.
It's a fitting way to look at it. The text argues that the search for order in science, the yearning for connection in religion, the pursuit of wisdom and philosophy, and the inward journey of spirituality, they're all essentially echoing the exact same fundamental frequency.
They're whispering the same underlying truth.
Exactly. This manuscript is an attempt to synthesize all four methodologies into a single unified framework. The author describes the book as a seed.
I found that word choice to be really crucial. A seed. The text is very careful to state that it isn't a dogma.
Right. It isn't asking for blind allegiance.
No, it explicitly asks you not to worship these concepts. It's framed as a journal of mental exploration.
The invitation is to plant this seed in your own mind, to test these ideas against your daily life, to live them, and to correct them if you find them logically wanting.
Because the goal of this seed is to foster a cognitive shift.
A move away from the deeply ingrained human default of strict individualism.
Right, toward a realization of absolute undeniable interconnectedness.
And that interconnectedness is summed up in the core foundational premise of the text. 3 short sentences. You are me. I am you. This is true.
Now I know exactly what a skeptical listener is thinking right now. You think, okay, great. It sounds like a lovely poetic metaphor for empathy. Let's all hold hands and sing songs around the campfire.
Right, a nice sentiment.
But we have to make this crystal clear. The text is not using this as a metaphor.
Not in the slightest. The author is attempting to prove this statement logically, mathematically, and through the physics and metaphysics of existence itself.
It's wild. The argument is that You Are Me is not just a nice moral guideline. It is the literal, objective, mechanical structure of reality.
So how does a book even begin to prove that you and I are literally the same thing?
Right. It has to start by aggressively challenging our most basic assumptions about reality.
To understand how everything is connected, we first have to understand how anything exists at all.
And the text starts this journey in chapter 2, which is provocatively titled, Nothing is Impossible.
This requires us to completely discard our everyday conversational understanding of absence.
Because when we talk about nothing in daily life, we are usually just talking about an empty space where we expected something to be.
Right, you look in the fridge and say there is nothing to eat.
But there's plenty in there, just not what you wanted.
Exactly. The core argument the text makes is that true absolute nothing exists nowhere.
Because the very act of naming it creates a paradox. If I say absolute nothingness exists, I have just assigned the property of existence to nothingness.
It's an immediate logical contradiction.
Yeah, it's semantic wordplay, but the text pushes this beyond just linguistics. It asks us to visualize the mechanics of absence.
Because to perceive an absence, there must intrinsically be a baseline of presence. Take darkness, for example.
Right, darkness is not a physical substance you can capture in a jar.
No, it is entirely contingent on the concept of light. Without the baseline concept of light, the word darkness has absolutely no meaning.
Or silence. Silence isn't a thing in itself. It requires the baseline concept of sound to be recognized as an absence.
The analogy I kept coming back to while reading this was trying to describe a hole in the ground.
Oh yeah, the whole analogy is perfect.
Think about it. You cannot describe a hole without referencing the dirt that surrounds it.
The whole itself is made of nothing but its entire identity, its shape, its depth, its volume. It's completely defined by the geometry of the dirt.
Or think about trying to describe an empty room. You can't do it without referencing the walls, the floor, and the ceiling.
Right. The absence has to borrow the geometry of something real just to be a concept. If there is no dirt, there is no hole.
The absence requires a boundary. Without a boundary, there is no absence. There is just an undefined state.
So the text provides this brilliant extended thought experiment to demonstrate the conceptual limit of pure non-being.
It asks the reader to engage in a mental exercise of absolute subtraction, to try and conceptualize the universe by peeling away every single layer of reality until we reach true nothingness.
Okay, let's walk through this because this is where the physics and the philosophy really start to bleed into each other.
Let's try to imagine absolute, pure, literal nothingness.
Okay, step one, we take the universe and we attempt to remove all matter. Every star, every planet, every atom, every quark, every photon. Gone.
But when you do that, you are not left with nothing. You are left with the concept of empty space.
Right, you are left with the spatial dimension. A vacuum.
And I would argue that modern physics tells us even a vacuum isn't empty. You have quantum fluctuations, virtual particles popping in and out of existence.
But even if we ignore quantum field theory for a second and just look at the classical concept, a vacuum is still aware. It has coordinates.
Exactly. You can measure the distance between 2 points in a vacuum.
Yeah.
If you can measure it, it's not nothing.
That is the exact point the text is making. Space itself is a framework, so the text moves to step two. Attempt to remove the spatial framework and all energy within it.
Okay, so remove all kinetic energy, all potential energy, all heat, all movement.
If you remove all energy, you hit the thermodynamic limit. You get the concept of absolute zero.
And absolute zero is still a state. It is a specific thermodynamic condition. So you have not reached nothingness, you have reached the state of ultimate rest.
Right, so step three, attempt to remove form entirely. Wipe away the coordinates, wipe away the dimensions, wipe away any structural geometry.
It's like trying to erase a whiteboard so aggressively that the whiteboard itself ceases to exist.
But even if you manage to conceptually erase the board, your mind is still left holding on to the concept of a formless void.
Right. The void itself becomes the object you are observing in your mind's eye.
Which brings us to the final, inescapable trap of the thought experiment. Step four.
Let's say you somehow manage to conceptualize a state without matter, without energy, without form, without color, without sound, and without time.
To even acknowledge that this state of absolute pure nothingness exists in your mind, it requires a thinking mind to observe the absence.
The observer trap.
Yeah, even if I scream, okay, I am currently imagining absolutely nothing, the I is still there doing the imagining.
The consciousness required to observe the void ruins the void. You cannot watch a room be empty because your presence in the room means it's no longer empty.
The text argues that this observing awareness is the fundamental bedrock of reality. Consciousness.
Without consciousness, any state of existence or non-existence would not be knowable.
Therefore, a universe of absolute nothingness cannot logically exist because the very declaration of its non-existence requires a consciousness to declare it.
The text uses a really funny, absurd example here. It talks about an apple made of gold and dust.
Oh, right. I love that part.
If I say, look, an apple made of gold and dust definitely does not exist in the physical universe, the text points out that to even make that claim, the idea of a golden dust apple must first exist in your mind.
You cannot deny the existence of a concept without first manifesting the concept conceptually.
The idea must serve as the baseline presence before you can declare its physical absence.
The conclusion the text draws from this exercise is absolute and foundational. Nothing does not exist. Only the absence of something exists.
The word nothing is just a linguistic shorthand we use for the absence of a specific thing or the absence of everything we currently expect.
But the potential for those things must exist.
So let's look at the ramifications of this. If absolute nothingness is a logical and mechanical impossibility, then something must have always existed.
We cannot have a universe that popped out of a true, literal void because a true void cannot exist. The Big Bang couldn't have come from nothing in the philosophical sense.
This moves us directly into the text's analysis of the causal chain of existence.
If something has always existed, we have to deduce what that something could possibly be.
The text breaks this down by looking at the prerequisites for physical reality. Physical existence matter is impossible without energy.
We don't need to retread basic relativity here. Anyone listening knows matter and energy are essentially interchangeable states.
Right, E equals mc squared.
But how does the text bridge the gap from energy to the pre-physical?
By analyzing the requirements of energy itself. Energy cannot exist without spacetime.
Because energy fundamentally is expressed through frequency, movement, vibration, and change.
Let's make that mechanical. If you pluck a guitar string, it vibrates.
But for that vibration to occur, the string physically needs a distance to swing back and forth across. It needs spatial geometry.
And it needs duration to move from point A to point B. It needs time.
Without a spatial framework, there is nowhere for movement to occur. Without a temporal framework, there is no sequence for change to happen.
Therefore, energy is entirely contingent upon the prior existence of space and time.
Okay, so matter relies on energy. Energy relies on space-time. But what does space-time rely on? If space-time had a beginning, what existed before it?
This is the critical threshold of the text. Since physical existence is impossible before the establishment of space and time, the only existence logically possible before space-time is non-physical existence.
Which introduces one of the most fascinating concepts in this entire deep dive, the ideaverse.
If things cannot exist physically yet, because the sandbox of space and time hasn't been built, they must exist conceptually. The potential for them must exist.
But ideas and concepts need a place to exist. A thought can't just float independently in a non-existent void.
Right, a thought requires a thinker. A concept requires a mind to conceptualize it.
Just as physical objects require physical space to exist, non-physical concepts, whether that's a thought, a law of mathematics, a blueprint for a universe, or sheer imagination, require a mental space.
The text identifies this ultimate mental space as consciousness.
But I have to push back on this a little bit because it feels like we are slipping into a territory where imagination equals reality.
It can sound like that at first glance.
Right, like if I imagine something logically contradictory, something impossible, let's say a square circle. Does a square circle exist just because I conjured the thought of it? Are we saying my arbitrary imagination grants reality to impossibilities?
The text is very explicit about this distinction, and it's vital we understand it. The text argues that, yes, the square circle exists, but you have to categorize how it exists.
Okay.
It exists exclusively in the ideaverse. It exists as a concept within consciousness.
But it can never be physical.
Right. It mathematically and geometrically cannot actualize into the physical realm. The laws of physics and geometry prohibit it.
But its existence as an idea, as a fleeting configuration of thought in your mind, is undeniable.
You just thought of it. We are discussing it right now. Therefore, the concept of a square circle holds a sliver of conceptual reality within the ideaverse.
So it has non-physical reality, but zero physical potential.
Correct. By deducing backward from matter to energy to space-time to non-physical concepts, to the mental space required to hold those concepts, the text concludes that in the very beginning, before physical reality, there was consciousness.
And this primal consciousness contained the ideaverse within itself.
Every single thing that could ever possibly exist and every concept that could ever be thought existed as pure potential within this primal consciousness.
It describes this primal consciousness as the beginning thing, the uncaused cause.
Which makes sense based on our earlier premise. If absolute nothingness is impossible, something had to be the baseline reality that never started, because there was never a nothing for it to start from.
Consciousness is the eternal canvas. It is the baseline presence required to even perceive absence.
And this leads us to a massive structural friction point. The text calls it the eternity problem.
The eternity problem, right? It's the question of how this infinite pool of potential within the ideaverse actually bridges the gap into physical reality.
Because having a giant cosmic mind full of ideas is practically useless if they never turn into actual physical matter.
How does the mere thought of a star in the ideaverse become a burning, fusing physical star in space? Why aren't we all just floating as abstract concepts in a cosmic dream?
To answer the mechanics of manifestation, the text introduces its boldest and perhaps most difficult metaphysical equation.
It posits that truth and existence are fundamentally the exact same thing. Now, hold on. I have a major problem with that.
I thought you might.
Truth is a descriptor. It's a linguistic tool humans use to describe a state of affairs. The sky is blue is a truth. The sky itself exists. But the concept of truth doesn't exist out there floating in the void.
You're saying truth is a judgment we make.
Exactly. How can truth be a physical force or a structural mechanism?
You are looking at truth through the lens of human epistemology, how we know things.
Okay.
The text is defining truth through ontology, the nature of being. The text argues that truth is not merely a description of reality. It is the state of non-contradiction that permits reality to exist.
What is true exists. What is not true does not exist.
Let me try to map that. Non-existence cannot be true because, as we established, absolute nothingness is impossible. Therefore, existence is the only ultimate truth. The text treats truth as the ultimate uncaused cause. Things don't just exist randomly. Things must exist and events must happen to maintain the structural validity of truth.
So you're saying existence isn't a happy accident? Existence is the unavoidable, compulsory byproduct of truth simply being true. It's a mandatory state.
Yes. And this is exactly where the eternity problem comes into play, to force the actualization of potential.
The text poses a scenario regarding the nature of infinity, right?
Let's imagine a specific potential, say the potential for a very unique type of crystalline planet to form.
Okay.
If that specific potential never manifests across the entire infinite span of eternity, what is the functional difference between that unmanifested potential and a literal impossibility?
Oh, wow. Okay, I see the friction there. If you have infinite time and something never happens forever, was it ever really possible in the first place?
The text argues that practically and logically, an eternal non-occurrence is identical to an impossibility.
If something is truly possible, an infinite timeline guarantees its occurrence.
Therefore, genuine objective potential must possess an inherent, inescapable tendency toward realization.
The analogy that helps me grasp this is an infinite lottery machine.
That's a good one.
Imagine a lottery machine filled with ping pong balls representing every possible event in the universe. If you run that machine for a week, you'll only get a few combinations.
Right.
If you run it for a billion years, you'll get a lot of combinations. But if you run that lottery machine for a true infinite eternity, drawing numbers constantly, the law of probability dictates that every single possible number combination must eventually be drawn.
The mathematical inevitability of infinity.
Right. If there is a specific combination, say all sevens, that is never drawn across the entire unending span of eternity, the only logical conclusion you can draw is that the ball with the number 7 was never actually in the machine to begin with.
It was an impossibility masquerading as a potential.
Exactly. The analogy works well for probability, but the text takes it a step further into metaphysical absolute necessity.
Objective potential cannot remain unrealized forever. Because the primal consciousness exists in a state of eternity, the potential it holds within the ideaverse cannot just sit there dormantly forever.
If it did, it would violate the equation of truth equals existence.
The text states potential for existence and the phenomenon of existence become one and the same over the time span of eternity.
So because the primal consciousness holds infinite potential, and because eternity mathematically and logically demands that all true potential actualizes, everything must eventually happen.
At the objective universal level, yes, every possibility must be explored.
Which leads us to a fascinating, deeply counterintuitive paradox about the nature of this primal consciousness.
The paradox of everything.
The text introduces a concept that has deep roots in Eastern philosophy, encapsulated in the phrase shunya is purna.
Can you break down the etymology of that for us? Because dropping Sanskrit into a physics discussion requires some unpacking.
Certainly. In ancient Sanskrit, shunya is a concept that generally translates to zero, void, emptiness, or nothingness.
It's the root of the mathematical concept of zero that eventually made its way into global mathematics, right?
Yes, and purna, on the other hand, means full, complete, absolute entirety, or the infinite whole.
So the phrase literally translates to void is fullness? or nothingness is everythingness.
Yes, in Eastern mysticism, these two extremes have been dancing around each other for millennia. The text adopts this to describe the absolute objective level of the primal consciousness.
If the primal consciousness holds everything in potential form and knows everything simultaneously, it exists in a state of purna absolute fullness.
But there is a massive structural catch to omniscience.
With the problem of omniscience, if you are everything and you know everything simultaneously, you know nothing in particular.
It is a critical perceptual flaw. Imagine a state of completely undifferentiated existence.
If you are aware of every single point in the universe simultaneously, you have no edges. You have no boundaries.
That means no single object, no single moment, no single experience can stand apart from the rest.
When awareness sees all things equally and simultaneously, it sees nothing in particular. It possesses all knowledge, which, ironically, is a state functionally identical to having no specific knowledge at all.
It's like having a canvas painted with every single color in the spectrum all mixed together perfectly.
You don't see a rainbow, you just see a muddy, uniform brown.
Or white light if you're talking about optics. You have all the colors, but you can't experience red.
The text uses a very grounding metaphor for this, the wood block.
Oh yeah, the wood block is a perfect way to visualize it.
Imagine a massive, uncarved block of wood. Within that block, there is the potential for every possible idol or statue of any shape or size, limited only by the dimensions of the wood.
Every masterpiece is in there.
But while the block holds all of them simultaneously, you can't see any specific one. You just see a chunk of timber.
To see a specific statue, you have to carve away all the other possibilities.
You must remove the wood that isn't the statue you want. You have to destroy the everything to experience the something.
This translates perfectly to the sensation of focus. Think about walking outside and looking at the night sky.
Right, you tilt your head back and you can see the whole sky.
You are taking in everything in your field of vision. You see the Milky Way, the darkness, the ambient light. But in that unfocused state, you aren't really seeing any specific star.
You are experiencing purna, the whole purna.
Right. Now, if I want to actually observe a particular star, I have to change my mechanics of perception. I have to intentionally remove my attention from the millions of other stars.
I have to actively blur out the rest of the universe, ignore the periphery, and narrow my awareness down to one single point of light.
That is the exact mechanical tactic the text describes. To know things sequentially and specifically, consciousness must employ the tactic of obscuration.
It must actively hide reality from itself. It focuses awareness by actively not looking elsewhere.
Only by deliberately ignoring everything can consciousness look at a particular thing.
In this realization, this is the pivot point of the entire book.
Because this specific act, this deliberate focusing of attention, this intentional limitation of awareness to a specific area so you can experience a specific thing, the text claims this is the exact genesis of the individual soul.
It is the ultimate synthesis of the manuscript's physics and spirituality. The text calls it the sequentialization of perception.
The absolute consciousness, trapped in the paradox of knowing everything but experiencing nothing in particular, creates individualized units of itself by compartmentalizing its focus.
We are the universe squinting.
That captures the mechanics beautifully. We are the universe squinting.
All of us, every listener, every human, every sentient being, are not separate creations built by an external God. We are individualized units of the absolute consciousness itself.
The absolute experiences the specific through us.
Suddenly the prologue. You are me, I am you, this is true isn't just a campfire song.
It is the mechanical reality of the system. We are quite literally the exact same primal consciousness.
The only difference between you and me is that the primal consciousness is focusing its attention on the coordinates of my life, and simultaneously focusing another beam of attention on the coordinates of your life.
The sum total of all our individualized limited experiences becomes the absolute's way of knowing itself in the specific.
The absolute itself has no specific agenda. It just holds all potential. But our individualized entities have chosen paths based on our limited focus.
We are exploring the specific on behalf of the whole. In essence, the text argues all entities are structurally equal.
We are all the exact same, absolutely just experiencing reality from uniquely exclusive vantage points.
This framework completely redefines the physical dimensions we live in. Because if reality is fundamentally just consciousness deciding where to focus, what does that make space and time?
The text radically redefines them. It states that space is simply consciousness manifested physically.
It is the necessary structural geometry required for physical existence to be held apart from itself.
And time. Time is the focus of awareness manifested physically.
Time is the focus of awareness. I need to make sure I understand the mechanics of that. You're saying time isn't an external ticking clock that governs the universe.
No.
Time is the internal mechanism that allows an individual unit of consciousness to experience things sequentially instead of all at once.
Because if you experienced everything all at once, you would be back in the state of shunya or purna. There would be no time, just eternal stillness.
Time is the friction of moving your focus from one point of data to the next.
The text uses the example of deep sleep to prove this mechanical relationship between focus and time.
Right. When you fall into a dreamless deep sleep, what happens?
Your focus of awareness ceases its sequential movement. You are no longer paying attention to any specific physical or mental object.
And consequently, for you in that individualized state, space and time vanish entirely. You don't feel 8 hours pass.
You close your eyes and instant later you open them. When you aren't focusing, time and space cease to exist for your individualized unit of consciousness.
You temporarily return to the absolute state of experiencing nothing in particular.
But wait, I have to throw a wrench in this.
Throw it.
If time is just my subjective focus and space is just my subjective manifestation, why do my watch and your watch sync up?
The shared reality problem.
Right when I wake up from that 8-hour deep sleep where time vanished for me, I don't wake up in the year 1894. I wake up exactly 8 hours later according to the shared reality of everyone else's clocks.
It's the most vital question to ask of any idealist philosophy.
If this is all just a mental projection where thought is the film roll, emotion is the light, and consciousness is the projector, why aren't we living in a chaotic, subjective dreamscape?
And the text anticipates this heavily in Chapter 4, addressing the metaphysics of creation. How do we share a reality if reality is subjective focus?
It comes down to the necessity of structural order. The text asks us to imagine a world without a rigid framework of cause and effect.
Total randomness. Anything could happen for no reason at all.
If anything could come into existence without a cause and vanish without a cause, there would be no stability. But more importantly, there could be no volitional creation by the individualized souls.
You couldn't will anything into being because your actions wouldn't reliably produce a result.
Right, if I want to build a house, I need absolute certainty that stacking bricks will result in a wall. I need gravity to work the same way every time.
If there is no causality, I might stack 2 bricks and they turn into a flock of birds or they fall upward.
Therefore, the text argues the very first act of the Creator, the primal consciousness when it decided to manifest the physical universe, had to be the establishment of the law of causality.
The rigid law of cause and effect. So before light, before matter, before planetary orbits, there had to be rules.
The law of causality must exist simultaneously with space and time for any other law, force, field, or energy to emerge.
Think of the Ideaverse as the fundamental operating system of reality. Causality is the core code.
It enforces consistency across multiple subjective foci.
It's the server architecture of the shared multiplayer game of reality.
Precisely. It dictates that actions have consistent reactions for all observers within the system. Without it, you wouldn't just have chaos, you'd have total isolation.
If your focus of awareness drops an apple and my focus of awareness watches it float away, we are no longer inhabiting the same shared reality.
The law of causality is what binds the billions of individualized souls into a cohesive, interactive universe.
And where do these laws exist? You can't put the law of gravity in a jar. You can't weigh the law of thermodynamics.
They exist in the Ideaverse. They are fundamentally ideas held in the permanent awareness of the absolute consciousness.
The physical world is just the projection screen of the mental world.
The physical can only exist within the boundaries of the non-physical laws.
The consciousness provides the space, and the Ideaverse provides the structure where laws can exist and become valid for all participants.
This framework completely flips the dominant scientific materialist worldview on its head.
The traditional view is that matter came first. The universe was dead rocks and gas. Then eventually biology evolved, brains developed, neurons fired, and boom, consciousness emerged as a byproduct of complex meat.
But this text is arguing the exact opposite. Consciousness created matter.
The physical world is essentially a highly regulated playground constructed by the cosmic mind so it could experience itself sequentially.
It effectively resolves the hard problem of consciousness, the mystery of how subjective experience arises from non-sentient matter, by positing that it doesn't.
Consciousness is the foundational element, the baseline reality, rather than an emergent property.
If you accept the premise that all laws of nature, space, time, and matter are fundamentally ideas held in the awareness of the absolute, the text argues that the myriad mysteries of physics and existence instantly resolve into a coherent whole.
Which brings us all the way back to the prologue and the true mission of this deep dive.
Because the author didn't write this just to give us a dorm room philosophical puzzle.
This isn't abstract mental gymnastics. The text was written as a seed for a wiser world.
The practical implications of this worldview are profound. If we truly understand, not just intellectually, but mechanically and physically, that the physical world is a shared mental space.
And that every single person you interact with is quite literally the same primal consciousness focusing on a different set of coordinates.
Then the illusion of separateness completely shatters.
Under this framework, you cannot fundamentally hate another person without hating a literal part of yourself.
You cannot harm another without harming the absolute that you are intrinsically a part of.
It's the ultimate empathy hack. But it's not based on morality, it's based on physics.
It provides the foundation for a world that is incredibly diverse, because the absolute wants to experience the specific. It needs all the different perspectives to escape the paradox of knowing nothing in particular, yet profoundly structurally united.
It calls for a shift from individualism to interconnectedness. Empathy is reframed.
It is no longer a behavioral choice or a social nicety. It is in alignment with fundamental reality.
Treating others with hostility or cruelty is akin to an autoimmune disease. It is the cosmic system attacking itself out of localized confusion.
Let's take a breath and recap the monumental journey we just went on.
We started by breaking down the concept of absence, realizing that absolute nothing is a logical impossibility because absence requires a boundary and an observer.
Therefore, a baseline of something must have always existed.
We then explored the causal chain, determining that this eternal something couldn't be physical because physical matter and energy require the prior establishment of space and time.
It had to be non-physical, an idea-verse of pure, infinite potential contained within a primal consciousness.
We wrestled with the equation that truth equals existence and how the eternity problem mathematically guarantees that infinite potential over an infinite timeline must eventually actualize into reality.
We faced the paradox of omniscience. Shunya is Purna, realizing that knowing everything simultaneously means knowing nothing in particular.
To truly experience the texture of reality, the absolute had to obscure its own totality and focus on the specific.
And that act of focusing, that intentional limitation of awareness, the universe squinting at itself, is you. It is me.
It is the birth of the individualized soul governed by the shared server rules of the law of causality to prevent total isolation and chaos.
So what is the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener? Why should you care about this dense metaphysical framework?
Because this is a completely different way to walk into a room.
It changes how you view a stranger on the subway or how you handle a bitter conflict at work.
If you or me is the literal truth of our shared existence, your relationship to the world changes.
You are no longer an isolated victim of a chaotic universe. You are the universe itself navigating its own complexities.
Empathy as an alignment with fundamental physics. I want to leave you with a final mind-bending exercise directly inspired by the mechanics of this text.
The source material states that attention is consciousness in its purest form.
It is the primal mechanism of limiting awareness to a focused area. And it suggests that the closest awareness you can have of your own fundamental nature, your soul, is to pay attention to your attention.
A fascinating recursive loop. Observing the observer.
So later today, when you find yourself deeply focused on a task at work, or lost in a daydream, or even just listening intently to a conversation, take a step back mentally.
Don't look at the thing you're focusing on.
Try to look at the focus itself. Realize that in that exact fraction of a second, you are experiencing the absolute primal mechanism of the universe deciding to look at one specific thing, but actively ignoring everything else.
You are feeling the weight of the universe squinting.